sat through that.
Joe, that's how I got to know you. You and I were on that.
That's right, we were on that together. That was a long time ago.
Long time ago.
So Kristen has joined us.
Good morning.
I told you I saw her last week and she said she'd be here. So please welcome both Nan and Kristen to the first meeting. And we're going to go around actually the room right now and just do introductions. So we'll start with Dr. Fine.
Yeah, Philip Fine, Deputy Executive Officer, Planning and Rules at AQMD. We staff this group.
Hi, I'm Kristen Torres calling. I'm with the Chief Sustainability Office for the County of Los Angeles.
I'm Terry Roberts with the American Lung Association in California.
I'm Larry Smith, California Methodist.
I'm Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance.
I'm Nan Harold. I'm a site engineer for Orange County Waste and Recycling.
Dan McGivney, SoCal Gas.
David Rothbart, Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts.
Kurt Coleman, Executive Director, Southern California Air Quality Alliance.
And SCAQMD, AQMD.
Mike Morris, Toxics, sitting in for Susan Nakamura.
Thank you.
Good morning, Nick Sanchez, AQMD Legal Department.
Great. And Paul's down there who always makes everything work and never gets acknowledged for anything. So, we already went through people on the phone. That takes care of agenda item number 1. The minutes for last meeting on item 2. Anyone have any corrections? Addenda?
I read them again this morning and they look good to me.
We rely on you to do that, and we thank Ann for preparing such thorough and accurate minutes each time. So without objection, we're going to consider those approved unilaterally by me, so we don't have to take a roll. And offer for public comment if anyone, members of the public, want to comment on any agenda item, they're more than welcome to. Item number 3 is EPA and federal issues, but I don't know if Doris has joined us. EPA?
Yes, this is Doris.
Oh, Doris,
Can you hear
great.
me?
Yes, yeah, wonderful. When we first asked, you weren't quite there. So we're on agenda item number 3, which is EPA and federal activities. If you have an update for us, we would appreciate it.
Sure. So Amy's in first. Sorry she can't join, and gave me some notes to follow up with you all on. I'll just go to the list and tell me if it's too much detail or if questions, feel free to.
We got plenty of time.
Okay. I think last time Amy had mentioned in terms of our Region 9 activities, we were working on some SIP actions related to reclaim, raft, and another action that dealt with sanction clocks. So I think one update is that the reclaim rule, a final rule was signed on August 15th, 2017, and we're waiting for publication on that rule. We're expecting publication on the 14th, which I think is Thursday, tomorrow, this week. So that was a full approval of 2 revisions to the reclaim program. There was also, I think, a reclaim raft demonstration that we are, let's see, the rule was signed on August 29th, 2017, and we're waiting publication for that action as well. So there's the actual rules, there's the demonstration. We also need to propose an action that will, is part of the 2.5 step that we had disapproved previously for racking deficiency. We'll be proposing action, we plan to propose to that deficiency has been fixed. And when we do that, we will be able to stay the sanctions clock or defer them, the sanctions clocks that are running related to that racking deficiency that was identified. So I'll pause there for a second. That might have been a lot.
No, I think we're keeping up. For the new folks, we do spend a lot of times talking in acronyms. Please feel free to interject. SIPs are supplemental, state implementation plans, and RACT is reasonably available control technology, and you will get used to it after 6 or 7 years. And but there are a lot of acronyms.
Explain reclaim.
Reclaim, yes, which I can never remember what it actually stands for anymore. It's the cap and trade program.
Clean Air Incentive Market.
Yes, right. Which is the cap and trade program for NOx and SOx.
Which are NOx and SOx.
Yes, NOx and SOx, oxides and nitrogen, sulfur oxides, chemicals that cause air pollution.
Explaining acronyms of acronyms.
Yeah, we shouldn't go down this route. We'll spend the rest of the afternoon just explaining acronyms. Any other questions or comments on so far on that stuff? It's all good news. Glad we escaped
Yeah,
this sanction clock, it looks like.
yeah, that's the plan.
What else do you have?
Okay, so those are the sort of South Coast related rulemaking actions. Then in addition, I guess she wanted us to let you know that for DERA funding, the competitive grant request for proposal period closed in July 2017, and the staff here are currently reviewing the submittals and grant awards. There's $34 million nationwide, and about $7.2 million will be in Region 9 for heavy-duty diesel retrofit, repower, and/or replacement. Then for the next round in the DERA school bus rebate program, that will be announced in early October, and there's about $7 million nationally for that program. And the tribal DERA program, DERA stands for Diesel Emission Reduction Act, by the way. The tribal DERA program is going to be a request for proposals that will be announced this month, and there's about $1 million national for that. Those are the DERA updates. Targeted airshed grants, 2017. I think those requests for proposals will close in October 18, 2017. For that program, there's about $30 million available nationwide and up to $4 million per proposal. And it goes to areas with the worst ozone and PM2.5 air pollution. Then, so those are the updates on the money, basically. Finally, for national updates, I'm sure some people are aware that well, first of all, you have to note here that there's no political appointees yet for Region 9 administrator and related offices. I think that, however, since the last meeting, we've had at least a new assistant administrator for air in Washington, D.C., Bill Wareham, who has been there before in the past, approved. So that will be our AA for the air program nationwide. For the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for ozone, the NAAQS, the 2008 ozone, or not 2008, sorry, 2015 ozone standard, we withdrew our deadline for request for extension, or we withdrew the extension request for setting the deadline to do that promulgation. And so our deadline is again October 1st to promulgate the designations for 2015 ozone standards. And current status is we're going to issue something by then to address that requirement. And let's see, I think that's it from her notes here.
Thank you very much. I know last time we had an update and there was a mention of the tribal funding for DERA, Diesel Emission Reduction Act. I think we asked to make sure that Matt reached out to the tribes within the boundaries of the district. Can we double check on that? We can leave no penny on the table when it comes to having to pay for cleaner trucks and equipment. Anyone have any other any questions or comments? Okay. None? Anyone on the phone? Members of the public? We have a very quiet members of the public over here. Thank you very much, Doris. Please give our best to Amy. I had the fortune of spending some time with her at a Silomar a few weeks back, so it was nice to be able to talk to her about things. Okay.
I'll let her know. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Item 4 is the Air Resources Board. I will not say ARB or CARB. I will say Air Resources Board. It's a state agency responsible for air quality.
Now it is actually California Air Resources Board.
California Air Resources Board.
Changed the name.
And they have a new logo.
And a new name.
A new name.
Not ARB anymore.
Not ARB anymore?
Really? You can call them CARB.
I can call them CARB?
No,
I don't
we
want
didn't
to
like it
CARB.
before. Sorry,
They
Chris.
like it now?
You're stealing our.
This is, he's actually going to talk about that. Okay, Chris, please tell us all about the rebranding of that agency in Sacramento that regulates air quality.
Great, thanks, Dr. Lou. This is Johnny Raymond, and as you know, this project will be transitioning from, it's in the process of being transitioned from Chris to myself. So I'm going to be providing the update today. And, as mentioned, earlier this month, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the California Air Resources Board. And so that involves new branding and a new logo, and we'll eventually have a brand new website that will be released. And so that's coming soon within the next days or weeks. In your packet, as you saw, there are a couple items coming up this month's board hearing. And so the board will be considering approval of the ozone SIP for the Eastern Kern County. In addition, there's a separate item, which is an update of the development of the PM 2.5 SIP for the San Joaquin Valley. And there are some other items for future board members for your reference. In terms of some current activities here at CARB, late last month we released the cap and trade auction results, and it was successful. It sold out, and so this helps to improve the market certainty for the entities participating, and it, as you know, it has a steady stream of GGRF money for the programs to invest in disadvantaged communities, which is great. In addition, the SB 1383, we continue to implement the short-lived climate pollutant strategy, and one activity that's currently ongoing is a dairy digester subgroup meeting, and so this involves a lot of stakeholders, the local air districts, as well as us, and we had a meeting on September 7th, which a very comprehensive discussion on natural gas vehicle markets, and so that's utilizing the renewable natural gas from the dairies and discuss opportunities to either get that into the pipeline as well as into the natural gas vehicles, which have multiple benefits, as you know. In addition, we talked about opportunities, how the low carbon fuel standards, pilot financial mechanisms could provide some incentives for that. In addition to the sustainable freight pilot projects, which calls for the dairy pilot cluster in San Joaquin Valley. In addition to, I wanted to mention that we have some upcoming community meetings, and so this is to really discuss concepts to control pollution from large freight facilities. That includes seaports, rail yards, and warehouses or distribution centers. And so, as you may recall, this came out of your South Coast AQMD plan, as well as mentioned in our mobile source strategy, and has connections with the SIP. And so this is really activity that we're going to continue to do as part of the Assembly Bill 617, which really establishes the guidance for development and implementation of community reduction plans focused on reducing exposures in communities most impacted by pollution. And one of which we have a whole schedule, and so we'll be visiting San Joaquin Valley, Long Beach, Inland Empire, Oakland, and San Diego. All that information is on our website, and that concludes my update. So any questions?
Thanks, Johnny. Any questions here?
Yeah, this is Kristen from LA County. What is the date of the Long Beach workshop?
The of the Long Beach is September 19th, and that's going to be from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Long Beach Main Library.
Thanks.
Oh, also as a warning, I believe that the city council was going to take up a controversial issue that same evening, so it may be difficult to park and get there because the city council and the library are co-located. So just a warning to everyone to get there early. I have a Coalition for Clean Air staff member who lives in Long Beach who warned me about this. I can't remember what the issue is that the city council is taking up, but it's something that they expect to bring in a lot of people. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Dan McGivney with SoCal Gas. I was just wondering if maybe, I know that the CARB staff is working on this, and obviously they're starting to have these meetings that Johnny just noted, but would it possible maybe for ARB staff to give us a presentation on their AB 617 proposals or plans in the near future when they've got some of that worked out?
They're doing an update. When's the update scheduled for the board? I think I just saw that.
In
617?
October,
So that meeting will, yeah, so for our next meeting, maybe we could do that. Do you think perhaps we could get a little bit of an update sort of on whatever you presented to the board when we meet again, which will be November?
we'll forward that up, that there shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, great, thanks for that suggestion.
I was gonna.
Dr. Liu, I have a question when.
Yeah, let Dr. Fine go, and then we'll get to you, Bill.
I was gonna also suggest that as a future topic, so, and there's impacts to CARB and there's impacts to districts, so if we could coordinate on a presentation, maybe we could come in and
So
talk about.
we'll pull out some of the freight stuff. We'll just have an item on freight at the next meeting to talk about both the ARB 617.
Yeah.
Which is not just freight, but it's
Right.
it's gonna be 617, it's gonna be broader than that, and we'll talk about our priorities too.
Okay.
There's a lot going on right now, so a lot will change between now and then, but we'll have a lot more clarity as to what's going on, because it'll be after CAP adoption, after the end of the legislative session, and 617 will have some substance behind it, we think, right?
Well, by then, I don't know, but at least we'll have the CARB presentation.
Okay. Great, Johnny, that'll be helpful. Please pass it along and see if we can, and you can coordinate with Phil, or someone can coordinate with Phil as to how to do both the South Coast portion and the CARB portion on that.
Absolutely, will do.
Okay, Bill, go ahead.
So this is related, and it might be best answered at this meeting that we're going to focus on AB 617, but Johnny, I was curious how you brought up the facility-based measures that came out of the AQMP process and kind of merged it with AB 617. And I was wondering if you could share with us your thoughts there, because that's the first time I've heard those two major issues kind of being put together.
And that's really in the context of this effort, is that, you know, ARB staff shall return to the board, and we're directed to come up with concepts for an indirect source route rule to reduce and control pollutions from large freight facilities. And so that would include a lot of those major freight hubs, the ports, rail yards, warehouses, and distribution centers. That's really all information I have, and any additional information I would have to ask the staff in that particular program area within our sustainable freight group.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
David?
While we're on the subject of AB 617, if it's possible for the next meeting to also talk about the role of CARB versus South Coast, kind of the purpose of home rule. It seems like this is a very good example of making sure we don't step on each other's toes.
If they could start by coordinating the presentation, then we'll know.
It'll be it.
If we can't coordinate the presentation, you'll have your answer.
Yeah. But you're right, it's a ripe issue for home rule. Any other questions or comments? Anyone on the phone, at the table, members of the public? The silent members of the public maintain their silence. Okay, Johnny, thank you very much, and Chris, thank you. Chris, are you retiring soon?
No, I'm transitioning to 617.
Are you? Oh, you've been roped in, really? Wow.
You got a man on the inside.
You must have really gotten someone mad over there. That's gonna be a fascinating program.
Home rule 617. Home rule.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting. That's for sure. Philip is not here. Is he going to be here? Do we know?
He is coming.
He's gonna be late.
Okay.
I mean, we could wait, or between you and me, we could cover a lot of the major issues.
Well, let's wait till
Okay.
Philip gets here, because he covers the legislative committee stuff as well as what's going on in the legislature. And the longer we wait, maybe something will be adopted, passed. We'll get text messages about it. Okay, so we're going to skip 5 and move straight to 6, which is update on litigation and related EPA items. And normally Bill, but today we have Nick.
Yeah, nothing further in addition to the report unless anyone has any questions.
Can't be that boring, really.
A lot of the things are continuation of ongoing litigation that's been reported. The only thing that's timely is Barbara and Megan Lorenz are in DC to argue the AQMD EPA case. Arguments are set for tomorrow before the court regarding our challenge of the recently approved ozone implementation guidance, which EPA requires non-attainment areas, which includes the district, to demonstrate reasonable further progress solely from sources within the area. So that would be quite a challenge from us for areas like Coachella Valley. We rely upon upwind reductions in emissions to reduce the emission levels in those areas. So,
Which number is it?
number 9.
Number 9.
So oral argument will be held tomorrow in the DC Circuit Court.
There just aren't sufficient sources within the boundaries of Coachella to actually get to attainment by demonstrating solely that their sources can be eliminated. But that's a rational argument.
Yes.
Not a legal one. So, well, we wish them well on that.
Any questions or comments on litigation items, litigation status update? Anyone on the phone? Members of the public? Anyone about to sue us?
No, okay, not admitting to it.
All right, so Philip's gotten here just in time to return back to item 5. Just missed us like 2 minutes, so.
Apologize for being late,
No,
but
it's all
a
right.
lot going on.
That's all right.
Sure. So I was actually just up in Sacramento yesterday, so I'll give you an update on that. But basically, starting with our recent legislative committee, that was last on September 8th. There was, again, as you should have your legislative committee packets, because there'll be written reports that have the bulk of the committee reports. I think they're available right at the table. And so basically our consultants provide an update. And so part of the update was just talking about how President Trump has been pushing the infrastructure package, which has been an ongoing process as well as other legislative issues in DC. However, of course, there's tax reform and other things that are crowding the agenda. So there's currently no administration bill. The general principles have been provided for a bill by the president, and that is investing $200 billion of federal money with the goal of leveraging another $800 billion in money from other sources to then come up with $1 trillion investment in infrastructure for the next 10 years. There's been pushback by Democrats and others in terms of wanting more upfront federal money, so that issue will continue to develop. One thing that we are looking to do is to try to, once that does get rolling, is to include clean air infrastructure funding investments as part of that package. So we're focused on continuing to try to be a part of that package once it finally takes shape. Also, there was, President Trump announced an environmental review executive order and reiterated that several things are already underway to streamline the permitting process and expedite infrastructure projects. There is more private investments. The goal is to try to get more private investments in infrastructure. Now, this was done by executive order, and this executive order also repealed a previous Obama administration executive order on climate change, which required agencies to factor in climate change, such as projected sea level rise and flooding issues in their decision-making in infrastructure projects. One other update was that Department of Transportation has announced its next round of Transportation Investing Generating Economic Recovery, or TIGER grants, which would make $500 million available for major transportation infrastructure projects. Applications for these grants are due in October. These projects will be for this money will be for projects that are between $5 and $25 million. And in the past, these grants have provided money for clean air related infrastructure developments. There's a few other parts of DERA is another issue that's been ongoing. Currently, there is an appropriations package that's being negotiated and discussed in the House. So there was a potential proposed amendment by Congressman Gary Palmer that would have cut Diesel Emission Reduction Act funding completely from the appropriations package. However, luckily, Congressman Palmer has not formally presented that amendment as part of that package. So it has not yet been put on the floor for debate or for discussion. So as of now, the current level is proposed as $75 million for DERA. However, our consultants are saying that there's currently a continuing resolution that puts funding through December 8th. So there may not be a full package until possibly December. So right now we're kind of going based on the current levels from the previous budget. Moving on to state. Of course, there's basically, this is the last week of the legislative session. So some of these reports are continually, updating, and so this is just slightly outdated. But basically, greenhouse gas reduction funding, there's about $1.5 billion that's available. Given that this is the last week of legislative session, there's also a recent proposition that required a 72-hour notice, or basically you have to have legislation in writing 3 days prior to voting on it for it to be eligible. So basically that was yesterday. So two packets. What's that?
Midnight.
Midnight yesterday. Although it would have to be literally 72 hours, so you do want to give yourself at least an hour. So by 11 or 10 o'clock at night.
They have done things down to the minute, yeah.
Yeah. So basically there had been proposals put out by the governor's office more formally, and a little bit informally, a press release that had some details from the Speaker Pro Tem, Kevin De Leon's office, basically trying to break down spending for the $1.5 billion. I will provide, instead of the ledge update, I'll look at some of the, actually I just printed out 2 bills that came out since basically in time to meet that deadline. One is AB 134 and identical bill SB 119. And this basically provides funding that would, one of the key parts is $250 million for Cara Moyer projects. And that was a big priority for the South Coast. And the breakdown is kind of as a formula that's been going ongoing, and that would be it's based on population, so 43% of that money would go to South Coast, which is $107.5 million. There's also money provided for agricultural type equipment. There's $140 million for freight equipment and advanced demonstration and pilot commercial deployment projects. $180 million for the HVIP program, and at least $35 million of this will go to zero emission buses. $140 million for the CVRP program, which including some of the income restrictions and things like that, and a little extra money for folks in disadvantaged communities. And also $100 million for EFMP and EFMP Plus Up and replacement of school buses.
Is this enough acronyms for you? None of them make any sense, right? It's all clean air spending. It's light duty, heavy duty, a lot of heavy duty spending for heavy duty vehicles and equipment.
Right. Cara Moyer is mostly heavy duty, but CVRP and EFMP are mostly for light duty type of incentive.
When we say light duty, we mean cars, passenger cars.
Smaller cars. Yes, exactly. So that's one of the programs. That basically allocates, I believe, $900 million of the $1.5 billion. So the other bill that came out, since I'm running through these, this one actually is dealing with AB 617, which was the bill that was passed along with the cap and trade extension bill, AB 398. that AB 398 extended cap and trade for another 10 years through 2030. AB 617 was kind of a companion bill, and this focused more on disadvantaged communities and local emissions and much more extensive responsibilities and frankly unfunded mandates on local air districts to do a lot more extensive monitoring, community monitoring, and air monitoring.
And emission reduction plans.
Emission reduction plans, identifying trouble spots, and coming up with plans to eliminate that, but it called for a lot more activity and responsibilities that were currently required. So part of that bill, this is, let's see here, this.
AB 109.
AB 109. And there's a companion bill, identical bill, SB 119. Oh, actually, no, that's the other one. Sorry. Let's see here.
93.
SB 93, thank you. And so that, one of the key here is that it provides $27 million for districts to implement AB 617. And that is a number that had been discussed by the South Coast in terms of what would be needed based on estimates, statewide estimates. So I will jump back into a little bit of what was discussed at Ledge Committee. And I was putting this all together.
I just want to qualify that. That's what South Coast and the other districts came up with as an annual cost.
Statewide annual cost, I apologize. Annual.
Closely, I mean, we asked for a little bit more, but that's pretty good.
One time.
It's one time, but it sets the stage.
Where's the money coming from?
That's actually coming from the Air Pollution Control Fund.
Oh, okay.
Not GGRF, which is a little bit better for us.
Yeah, so Philip, the 29?
27 million
27,
statewide.
27, that's statewide.
Statewide, yes.
And then you get what, 43%?
I'm hoping to get more, but we had estimated just for ourselves somewhere between, depending how it gets implemented, we don't have the guidance from CARB yet, but between 10 and $15 million a year.
Right. So, and that's not necessarily done by the same allocation as the Carl Moore money, so it won't necessarily be.
No, that's just for the staff time needed to monitor and do community reduction plans and outreach and emissions reporting and BART rules and everything.
You're ready
else.
for a lot more work groups.
Okay, so essentially, and let me jump through because some of this was what we talked about in Ledge Committee was basically before these proposals came out. Let's see here. So the other key update is going to be our remaining bill, AB 1274, and that is our smog abatement fee bill that would push back a smog check by 2 years, and it would divert the money that a consumer would have paid towards a smog abatement fee, and the consumer actually saves an $8.25 smog certificate fee, so there's a savings for consumers, and it redirects the money towards Carl Moyer, which is a more effective way of reducing NOx emissions and diesel PM emissions. This bill basically had just gotten out when we had gotten out of the Senate Appropriations Committee last night, near the end of the evening, probably about 7:30 or so. It did barely pass by exactly the number of 27 votes, 2/3 vote needed to get out of the Senate. So it now has passed the Senate and is going back to the Assembly for what we call a concurrence vote. Basically, there were a couple of changes made as journey through the Senate, has to go back for a double check okay from the Assembly. Because it is a 2/3 vote, you know, it is still a challenge to get that 2/3 concurrence vote, so that we'll be working, staff is up there working with our consultants to make sure that we secure that 2/3 concurrence vote. After that, it will go on to the governor for consideration and hopefully signing the bill into law. And that particular bill is the one that we would be estimating to get also 43%. This would add to the Carl Moyer funding pot that is also been coming from greenhouse gas reduction funds. This bill is estimated to more than double the current up to 65 to $69 million statewide on an annual basis of Carl Moyer funding that's received as part of current smog abatement fees. So this would more than double it, and we would get about 43% of that funding, and that could be our AQD share. South Coast would probably be about $30 to $40 million per year. Once a recent amendment that was made to that bill, however, would delay implementation till January 1st, 2019. That's because the DMV wanted a little bit more time for how to implement this fee because it'll be done through DMV registration. Since we've been talking about 617, I provided an update at Ledge Committee about 617. So I think we've talked about it a little bit already, but I can actually, basically the focus here for 617 is disadvantaged communities, and there are a number of, more specifically, some of the requirements, actually have my, sorry, hold it, there we go. The 4 key areas that South Coast's new responsibilities would revolve around would be community monitoring and analysis, the development and implementation of community emission reduction programs, BART implementation, or basically new BART assessments and subsequent amendments to SCAQMD rules at a pretty extensive, fast pace, and also uniform emission reporting that would modify SCAQMD's current annual emission reporting system. And this is basically to be part of the statewide uniform emission reporting system that would be developed under this bill. 617 would also increase some civil and criminal penalties for air pollution violations, adjusting strict liability penalty limits that haven't been increased in decades, and would require inflation adjustments going forward. So the good news is these, what had been unfunded mandates and a promise for future funding, seems to be coming to fruition by these new budget bills that are coming out. And so hopefully these will be voted on Friday after the 3 days has been, the waiting period is finished. And hopefully they will go ahead and provide funding both for 617 and some of the $1 billion that we were, per year that we were already asking for. And that's my report.
Bill?
But by the way, your ledge report isn't here, it didn't arrive, so
Oh, okay.
maybe Ann could make that available to us. But going back to 617, at present, we're engaged with staff on proposed amended rule 1469 and 1426, but 1469. And that calls, our staff is looking for community monitoring. Wherever they find it right now, it's the focus has been on Paramount and Compton. I think those two communities, and I don't know where they're going to go next. But the question has been the cost of monitoring. And we started some months back when Dr. Burke was waiving an invoice and said $6,000 a week. You know, where's this coming from? What was coming out of your budget at that time? 617 gives your agency or all air districts the authority to raise fees or somehow bill these individual sources. Wayne is also is on record by saying that it's impractical or infeasible for this air district, and his comments were shared by 3 other executive officers, Sacramento, San Joaquin Valley, and Bay Area, for them to do that, hence the unfunded mandate. So my question is, does this $10 to $15 million, can some of that or some of that to whatever extent is necessary be used to offset the cost of these monitoring procedures that you intend to move forward with?
I could address that better. So, for the language in 1469 was amended Rule 1469, which is our chrome plating and anodizing rule, has evolved over the last several months, and a lot of the monitoring requirements have actually been removed from that rule.
I know you talk about a separate rule.
Yeah, so we have envisioned probably a broader rule to cover some of the monitoring requirements that could apply to those and other facilities. But that rulemaking hasn't started yet, and we need to get started on that. So even though we were all in Sacramento making the case that this could be an unfunded mandate, there was a lot of pushback, like to the districts, you could just raise your fees to cover any increased costs of monitoring and mandates under AB 617. And our response was, well, first of all, we think we have the authority now. It's not just provided in AB 617, although it does clarify it. But there are a couple difficulties in implementing it. One was timing, right? So we're going to have some obligations to do monitoring in a way that essentially makes us begin now. And there's no way we can raise fees quickly enough to cover some of the initial costs. And then secondly, it's not always, while maybe some of the larger facilities can afford an increased fee to do some of the monitoring, some of the smaller businesses may not. The other point was when you're doing community monitoring, you are looking for potential emission sources or potential problems, and you don't know who they are yet. So how do you charge a facility that's not contributing at all? You don't know yet. Maybe once you identify them, there's some procedures we can take, which might be the subject of this monitoring rule we've been talking about. In any case, the legislature has, I think, bought our argument that, the timing was difficult. But I think there is an expectation that going forward, even though we hope we get statewide $27 million a year for the next 20 years, there is an expectation at some point that we need to recover these costs locally. So it's something we definitely need to look into, but there are some difficulties and practicalities that make it a little more difficult than a simple view of it.
So this is a work in progress, I guess.
Work in progress. So I think where we are hopefully directing any state funding that comes this first round is getting the equipment in place, but a lot of the monitoring that's going to have to happen where you may not know exactly what the source is, or maybe it's a mobile source and we have limited ability to recover costs from mobile source facilities. So,
as you know, in addition to the monitoring, there are a number of other going to be a number of other requirements in 1469 that are build outs and fabrications and modifications and so on. So the bottom line is some of these businesses are going out won't survive this. It's just as simple as that. So, but that's something that will evolve or devolve as the rule goes forward. But I just wanted to clarify what Philip's comments about this funding, and are you alert to the fact that some of that could be used, and you're telling me you are. So
it will be used, but again, 1469 does not have those monitoring requirements at the current time. We are going to be working on this other rule, and how that plays into whatever state funding we're getting is going to be part of that discussion. And our intent with 1469 is not to put any facilities out of business, and we've been working on the language to reduce, make sure the costs are reasonable for everyone affected.
So Phil or Bill, have you guys heard anything about the European Union actually prohibiting hexagon chromium plating operation?
I followed a little bit of that, but there really wasn't, I guess, anything definitive. I guess I don't know, what does it take?
I heard from someone yesterday that they actually have gone through with it, so I was wondering what's.
I heard something months ago, but I can double check and report.
You might want to look into it. I don't know what they're doing as an alternative, I guess Trivillion or something. But
well,
it'd be interesting.
Most of my chrome platers, or at least the Metal Finishers Association, many of them either chrome to mil spec or NASA spec, or FDA.
Right. But I mean, I assume that they're the same type of mil specs and European Space Agency specs in Europe, right? So I don't know what they're doing. I have no idea. So I'm just asking the question because I just heard about it yesterday. I was kind of surprised to hear.
I guess I would look to France or something. I mean, they seem very active in space.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it might be worth looking into to see what the heck's going on in Europe. I don't know who got their card up first, Jackie.
I think Jackie did.
So I have a question for Phil regarding AB 617 and its effects on the reclaim program. And I know there's been some discussion, and I saw that. So it actually, and I guess would you please clarify, so they actually, in AB 617 has effects on reclaim that it's going to increase BART for facilities that are in the cap and trade program, so facilities that exceed 25,000 metric tons, correct? And it's,
That's what it says, yeah.
and then it's the district's determination of BART, and what if we don't have that as of now for some of those facilities?
Well, there is a provision for this statewide BART clearinghouse, but our reading of the language does not require any district to necessarily adopt what the statewide BART is. So there still is some leeway at the district level, and it's to be expected that different districts would have different definitions of BART for the kind of obvious reason that a BART determination includes a cost effectiveness threshold, and different districts will have different cost effectiveness thresholds as a matter of policy and as a matter of their attainment status. So that's something that we'll have to work through with CARB on this clearinghouse to be very clear that it's not one size fits all. Having said that, in terms of our rules, we don't intend to make any distinctions between whether you're a cap and trade facility or not a cap and trade facility, whether you're in reclaim or out of reclaim or former reclaim. Like, our rules generally apply to all facilities. You know, sometimes there's provisions for larger versus small facilities, but we generally don't base that on CO2 emissions. So the challenge before us is to update a series of rules to make sure that we have BART requirements as facilities come out of reclaim. So they are subject to limits that meet BART, and the timelines in AB 617 have at least let us know that the intent of the legislature is to do it faster than maybe we were thinking before. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. We're doing a reclaim working group tomorrow, is it? And we'll be discussing kind of this process going forward and the timeline, which is incredibly compressed at this point.
Good.
Is that clear enough for you?
Yeah. I'd be interested to see what happens here in the next year and a half. I have those timelines.
Will be interesting. It's okay. Chris Gownsky is going to take care of all of it for us. Kurt.
Yeah, earlier this year, my recollection, there was the district was sponsoring a bill to redefine the level of emissions in the fleet vehicle rule from methanol equivalent to something else, or at least you were talking about that. And was that included in any of the bills that have been passed or likely to pass, or what's the status of that?
Well, yeah, that was included as a directive from the board as an amendment to the AQMP. And there was a bill, AB 302, that the board did go ahead and authorize specific, authorization for that legislation. Right. That bill became a 2-year bill.
Okay.
So it won't be addressed until next year, but it currently stands as a directive from the board to go ahead and pursue those.
I just wondered what the status was.
Yeah,
2-year bill, that's it.
No current bill in this legislative year.
Okay.
And I think it was a little bit more than just the methanol.
Right,
Yeah.
Oh, there were, it was broader than that, but that was, I mean, to me, that was a very significant change in the current law. Yeah, that allows you to go.
We should say overdue change.
Yeah.
So who's the author of 302, do you remember?
That was Gibson, Mike Gibson. Someone other.
Yeah.
We had enough going this year, so
yeah.
We'll get back to that next year.
Yeah, I don't ever remember reading the bill, so it'd be interesting to see what it says. Jackie, your card's up. You're done? Okay. And Kristen, we do care about carbon emissions. It's just that we don't normally use it as a basis for determining what regulations we adopt. Although the legislatures, they seem to think differently. Any other questions or comments on item 5, legislative update?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, Bill.
So I was just curious. I know that these bills are budget trailer bills, and so they go through a process that's a little bit different than a normal bill. But I'm still curious, these bills, if I recognize or look at them correctly, the funding allocated to the AQMD is less than what was in the press release, for example, that Mr. Lippers circulated at the Pro Tem. So I'm curious to see if the district is actually taking a position on these bills.
Well, you know, that's one of the proposals. There's competing proposals that happen every year. The governor, the Senate, the Assembly, things like that. So that particular press release was the Senate's proposal, and we were supportive of that. We did a letter in support of that. Now the bills that are coming out, you know, that's basically the done deal. Since there is that 72-hour rule, there's not a whole lot of change there. I believe that there was a Senate budget hearing last night, and there was supposed to be an Assembly budget hearing this morning to kind of have those bills go through committee. But because they're not able to make changes to them to meet that 72-hour rule, there's not a whole lot. There might be a little bit of adjustment that they might have made, but there's not a whole lot left for wiggle room.
I
So
don't think you can change anything.
we've said our piece in terms of what we're trying to get, and I think this comes to basically an earlier end of, you know, normally what they would maybe play out till Thursday or Friday of the last week. This time it plays out to like maybe Tuesday. So I don't think we have
So
plans.
they're cooked,
They're cooked.
but we are supporting.
Yeah, it's getting
Because
funded,
it brings
absolutely.
hundreds of millions of dollars to AQMP implementation priorities. How does
Just
how does
to follow
Seed
up on
feel
that,
about
I mean,
it?
So we're having a conference call at 1 o'clock, but I think they're already cooked, as you said. So I'm curious on these type of funding bills, is the districts submitting letters of support for these, or did you do that by your support for the press release?
Well, we did do support for the press release when there was basically still negotiations going on. One of these bills just came out yesterday, so I don't believe we have plans to
And
do
it'll
letters.
probably be a letter for the floor votes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could do that, yeah, floor alert.
But we're very active in Sacramento. We'll be up there the next couple of days and making sure that this all goes smoothly.
And hoping and expecting a strong support from Seed.
I'll let you know at 1:30.
No pressure. Okay, any other questions or comments, members of the public? $1.5 billion on the table, folks. We'll know by Friday, maybe even by tomorrow. Okay, thanks for that update, Phil. You can get back to trying to get those bills through. We did 6, so this brings us to our control of particulate matter emissions from soils with toxic air contaminants. Didn't we adopt this?
Yeah, but
Yes.
this
Yeah.
is phase 2.
Oh, we have phase 2? Well, I'm sure it'll be straightened out.
We thought, first of all, Susan is tied up, so Mike Morris is going to give the presentation. But this is more of a presentation on what was actually adopted by the board, but we thought it was a good topic for this home rule advisory group because of the way that this rule kind of fills a gap in the regulatory structure between DTSC and us and EPA, and we crafted a rule that tries to leverage the different activities and authorities of the different agencies. So we thought it was a good example to bring before this committee because it's right on topic. So go ahead, Mike.
Great.
Thanks, Mike.
So as Phil mentioned, this rule is basically trying to fill a regulatory gap. When earth-moving activities and situations like that occur, right now, or previous to the adoption of 1466, we essentially had 3 ways to regulate that type of activity. Our nuisance rule, Rule 402, if the soil happened to have VOC in it, we could apply our Rule 1166. But for the most part, the rule that would apply to these types of activities was Rule 403. And Rule 403 works great. It's completely adequate for normal, ordinary dust situations. But we're looking at, in this case, situations where the dust contains high levels of toxic air contaminants. And we realized that there was this gap in our rule system, and we tried to address it by adopting Rule 1466. Prior to the adoption of 1466, most of the regulatory agencies and their cleanup action plans referenced Rule 403. And so the requirements were simply modest measures to try and contain the fugitive dust and limited monitoring available. What we did in 1466 is adopt the best control measures that were available for particulate control, and look to incorporate those types of measures into their cleanup plans, either their remedial action plans or a cleanup plan. And the intention was that they would go into the plans, and the operators or the contractors who would be working on these sites would simply follow the plan that they normally do, but instead of it referring back to Rule 403, it would instead refer back to 1466. 1466 provides much more protection for the surrounding communities around these types of sites. The rule applicability is generally set for agencies who designate these types of sites, whether it be the US EPA, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, the water boards. There is a provision, which I'll get into a little bit later, about the South Coast being able to designate these sites, but the intention of the rule is for these other agencies that normally handle these cleanup sites to designate the site, and then if one of the 8 contaminants that we have listed on here is a toxic air contaminant of concern, then our rule would apply. We chose these particular contaminants because they cover about 90% of the activities that these designated agencies handle, and they're the most common of the pollutants that are also toxic air contaminants. And then because these sites are often dormant for long periods of time as they're working through the paperwork and the planning to go ahead and work on these sites, we limited the rule applicability to just when the earth moving activities occur. The requirements in the rule are pretty extensive. I think the most important part of the rule development is our air monitoring portion of it. We do require that monitors be present whenever the earth moving activity occurs. We also set a limit that's half of the standard for Rule 403. And these monitors that are on site are required to do continuous data logging so that not only can we go back and check to see that the site's been compliant over a given period of time, but it also provides immediate feedback for the site operators themselves to know when they have a problem. And so every 2 hours they should be checking to see that their dust levels are low, and if they're not, they're required to stop their operations, take care of the issue, and then once they have everything back in order within 30 minutes, they can go ahead and restart. And so we're trying to not delay the projects in any way, but to give them immediate feedback when there's an issue so that they can address that right away instead of waiting 2 or 3 or however longer days before they actually take any action. That required us to use the dust PM10 levels as a surrogate instead of the individual contaminants. The dust control measures that are there, again, are our best control measures that we have throughout several different rules that we have. They require things that are fairly basic, like watering and things like that, to more complex requirements such as track out measures, stockpiling, and then a requirement of an on-site dust control supervisor. We ask that they notify us so that we're aware of the operation that's going on and we can have personnel on site if necessary. We also require signage for the facilities, or for the sites, so that it limits unauthorized access to the site and warns the community about what might be going on. And then finally, of course, records so that if necessary, we can go back and take a look at the data if an issue comes up. As I mentioned, we do have a provision in the rule for executive officer designated sites. Basically, the idea behind this is that in case one of these sites doesn't happen to be designated by a cleanup agency. We have the ability in specific certain situations to go in and say, we'd like 1466 to apply. There is a process that is involved in this, so that's not just necessarily, we heard a complaint and we jump in and we say 1466 applies. But instead, we go through, we discuss it with the other agencies, what's going on, we go to the site itself and ask them to provide information, then we make a determination, and then 1466 will apply. Because these sites range over a very wide level of different types of activities, we wanted the rule to be very flexible. We included alternative provisions in almost every aspect of the rule to allow maximum flexibility. We certainly didn't want this to slow down any of the process as we went along. And this was something that came through with the working group meetings where we had the various agencies, DTSC, EPA, the water boards, consultants and such, providing input and feedback on our provisions and looking to have maximum flexibility in this rule. The only areas that we don't allow for alternative provisions are where it affects schools and early education centers, and in those cases we have some rather strict provisions for when these types of operations can occur. There are several exemptions in the rule, mostly for smaller operations, whether they be sampling activities or cleanup over less than 50 cubic yards, or excavation activities under 500 cubic yards that are directly loaded into a closed container, and then of course an exemption for emergency activities. As mentioned, we are doing some further work on 1466. We were directed to look at metals, pesticides, herbicides, persistent bioaccumulative toxics, and semi-volatile organic compounds. We've discussed that in our working groups. We're looking at including to the list of the 8 already on there, dioxins, DDT, PAHs. We had looked at some of the metals like cobalt and manganese, but our stakeholders felt like those contaminants really weren't often in a site. And so with this inclusion of these additional materials or compounds, we feel like instead of, we'll be covering about 98% of that gap. And there could be some unusual activities. Over a look over 3 years, we found that there was a zinc operation that wouldn't have been covered. There's sometimes some work on radioactivity that we wouldn't cover, but for the most part, with the addition of these compounds, we feel like we really cover the bulk of the activities that are cleanup or remediation activities. The other area that we're looking at modifying in this upcoming rule is to expand the applicability beyond just the 3 agencies, US EPA, DTSC, and the water boards, to include local agencies, including CUPAs and cities and fire departments. That was brought to our attention when they do the voluntary type cleanup action plans. The sites have a choice of who they would go to, and if we have a more stringent regulatory structure on some types of designating agencies and not so much on the others, obviously there might be an impetus to get for the sites to choose the one that has a lesser regulation. So we're trying to cover that base as well. There's going to be some minor clarifications in the rule for provisions that as they're coming online, the rule is just in August become effective, where we might have to make some very minor tweaks. And then in addition to that, we're trying to get the word out to the CUPAs, to the other agencies, to the cities and the fire departments through brochures and outreach. We've been doing quite a few presentations to these types of organizations, trying to let them know about the applicability of the rule. And with that, that concludes my presentation.
I have David, Larry, and Bill.
Quick question
Sure.
for you. I've heard from some consultants that were a little concerned about achieving a particulate matter reduction in the rule. I was curious, has staff looked into how achievable the standard is? I mean, it's nice having it simplified so you don't have to test for metals, but as far as saying, okay, you have to achieve this particulate matter level, has anyone checked to make sure that's readily achievable?
So when we were first adopting Rule 1466, that question came up pretty extensively. And the consensus of the stakeholders was that 25 micrograms per cubic meter would be an achievable standard. I think where there's been some questions lately has been on the monitors themselves and how accurate they are, and whether the noise that's generally inherent in these monitors might play some role in making it difficult for the sites to be able to meet that 25 microgram per cubic meter standard. We've been doing some studies at our Riverside Met Station as well as here at the district of testing the monitors side by side, and we should have a pretty good sense for whether or not those monitors will be accurate enough to be able to look at the 25. Our initial conclusions is that yes, they will be, but the thought that 25 is not achievable, I think it isn't quite the key issue. It's whether or not the monitors have too much noise in them. And so that's what we're looking into right now.
Is that something to be resolved prior to going to the board for approval?
We should have information within the next few weeks, at least for those initial 2 studies.
Larry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. Is the expectation of the applicant or the agency to do notification? So the agency that may be holding the grading permit, is the notification back to the district from them or from the applicant themselves?
So it'll be, generally these sites work with the contractors, and so it'll be that contractor that is required to notify us. It can be from the owner of the site or some others, like the agency themselves. We just need the one notification, and we imagine that through the different levels of that particular organization, one of those entities will notify us. And it doesn't really matter which one.
Okay, so if there's a single notification, the assumption would be the other agencies that need to be notified would therefore be notified?
Well, the other agencies won't necessarily need to be notified. So the agency itself, like say DTSC, they'll have a cleanup plan already with them, and they're already working directly with the site. It's just us that needs to be notified.
I'm going to give you a hypothetical. We're grading a 40-acre area, and we find a pocket of contamination through monitoring or just visual or hand monitor. Is that going to shut down the entire 40 acres, or is that isolated area can be designated as that inactivity here, continue to move forward?
Well, so the way that our rule works is that only if the designated agency had already said, you know, you're subject to 1466, would finding that pocket actually lead to some type of change in your operation. Otherwise, it's upon the air district themselves to come out and find that, in fact, that site needs to start following Rule 1466.
So it wouldn't be necessarily us if we found that pocket. It would probably be that other oversight agency.
Right.
Unless we, got a lot of complaints or our inspectors found something, and for whatever reason, those other agencies didn't, weren't taking action fast enough.
But the question of would it be the entire facility or just the designated area?
Would depend on the designation by that other authority.
Or if it was an executive officer designation, the executive officer has the discretion to decide just an area.
Yeah, and we figured that a lot of sites will have, wide areas of non-contamination and then just small pockets, and they certainly can just deal with the small pocket as opposed to the entire facility. So we're not trying to say, like you said, 40-acre site, you have half an acre that's contaminated. We're not trying to control the 40 acres, just that half acre.
Because that's really important, because if somebody's mobilized with a schedule and there's all this equipment, and we're shut down for 20 or 30 cubic yards of potential contamination. So, well, that's good they thought that through. But I wasn't assuming it was a 1466 rule site. I was thinking if it became one, now what happens? Because you can't you can't figure it out, so sometimes you open it up. And
Yeah,
then-
in those cases, it would either be through the designating agency, or as Phil mentioned, we become aware of it, and then we do our process, and then we tell the facility, okay, 1466.
If it was 20, 30 cubic yards, there's a 50 cubic yard.
Yeah, I see that 50 cubic yard minimal, but, you could do some soil sampling, and you're saying, oh, I'm under a 50 cubic, because I'm only planning on moving 40 yards, but all of a sudden you open it up, and now you find a plume of 500 cubic yards.
So we didn't want to become the default designating agency. We are not a soil agency. So that's why this rule is an example of how we're leveraging the other agencies' expertise and authorities, but filling a gap, because again, if these other agencies, which generally in cleanup plans require that the cleanup contractor, whoever, or owner, comply with all applicable rules and regulations. The only applicable rule or regulation we really had was 403 or 1166 or 402. And we were coming to the conclusion that the 403 provisions were not sufficient. We needed to go a little bit above and beyond if you had contaminated soil just versus dust in general.
Larry, do you know how they handle this issue when it comes to like artifacts, Native American, burial things, or finding mastodons, or whatever you do when you start digging things up? They just designate the area, right?
That's how it's done, but typically going into a site, if it's assumed that those agencies are notified, say, hey, potentially we could find this here, kind of an artifact notification.
Yeah.
But as soon as something like that is determined, then it's yellow taped off and everybody stays away. That's usually in-house before agencies have a chance to even get on board.
Mhm.
There's an assumption there.
Yeah.
So they kind of stop activity in that area. I was just hoping that the agency wouldn't step in and say, since somebody assumes this, we're shutting this thing down until we determine. I don't know if that's really fair, because it could be isolated.
Sound like it.
If it's throughout, then
The
maybe-
first thing is to figure out whether you meet the exemption. Then the second thing
Right,
is
once you're
then
beyond the exemption
if-
part,
yeah,
then you've got to
if
be
the-
subject.
And there's a process. Our executive officer, by rule, consults with DTSC or the Water Board or EPA to get their expertise and feedback on, is this isolated, or is it a bigger issue?
Right.
Go through, there's a set of criteria before we designate. And then the executive officer also has the authority to decide which provisions of the rule would apply to that particular site. It's not all or nothing. So there's flexibility there to work through it.
I hope we'd be careful in communicating to the operators that this is not a shutdown procedure. That's the biggest concern about additional regulatory activity. Somebody's gonna find a way to shut me
Well,
down.
especially if you're not known to have toxics on site beforehand.
It's a different game, you're right.
That's
If you
completely
know you've had a history of a
Yeah,
gas station or
then that's an
something,
issue.
everybody's aware of that, but it's
Yeah.
those surprises.
Yeah,
that,
which happen.
We
of
used to always
course.
say we can't bid what we can't see, and oftentimes we don't wanna see it. But when you do expose it, there's gotta be a way that you can figure out to continue activity and not, and be in compliance, so that'd be my concern. Thank you for the answers.
Thank you.
Bill and then Dan.
Yeah, I guess just, Larry mentioned a word here that raised another question for me, and that was the word schedule.
But you had your card up before he.
It was almost a tie.
Okay.
I'm not arguing with the pecking order here. I'm just saying, when Larry commented about schedule, contractors, I can see this section of the work site being a source of concern and raising questions that need to be resolved by the executive officer. Is there a time limit in there?
We did discuss that, didn't we?
Because, crews have to abide by a schedule. I mean, that's in your contract. And is this going to take, an hour or 8 hours or 8 months or?
The rule doesn't really work that way, right? You're either in or you're out. You're either designated or you're not designated. There's a process up to the designation that could be quickly, could not be quickly, but the requirements don't apply until you're designated. So once you're designated and you're subject to all or some of the rule, the only shutdown provision is if you are monitoring and you get that
over
hit,
25.
and it's over 25, and it's just a pause for 30 minutes or so?
30 minutes, yes.
Until you can get, make sure your dust control practices are
Take
in
care of the
order.
problem.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And then you start up again. And the biggest issue on schedule, and this was debated at length, was if you're close to a school or daycare center, whatever the list is. And then there's some limitations on the timing of when you can do the earth moving activities. That's gonna have a bigger impact on schedule than.
But those are red flags that you know before you move.
Well,
on.
in advance, you can schedule around them.
Yeah, you schedule around.
But your question couldn't have been about scheduling because your cards went up at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
So what was your real question?
When he was talking, he mentioned schedule in there, and that's what I was.
Okay.
Had nothing to do with the pecking order. 403. 403, to my recollection, was last revised in 2005. You got an implementation guide in there, and a couple of other things. Is that going to be amended now?
Personally, I think it needs to be amended because the monitoring piece of that is really antiquated. Whether it's, we have a rule schedule for the next 16 months for reasons we discussed is pretty insane. So I've been wanting to get back to that for years. We've done we did some contracts and some research work on different types of monitoring a few years ago. It does need revision, but whether it makes it to the top of the list, given our other challenges, I'm not sure.
Well, your December rule forecast, that's the one that's comes out with everything, including the kitchen sink stuff.
Yeah.
Yes. Right, and the board members are gonna be really happy to take on 10 rules in December, I'm sure.
10.
Is it more than 10?
Yes.
It keeps going up.
Yeah, yeah. Don't hold your breath. There will be motions for adjourning to get on with holidays, I'm sure. Okay, Dan, that addressed yours?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions on 1466? Anyone on the phone? You know, I do notice we don't have anyone from DTSE or the water boards on home rule, and I'm wondering whether we may want to invite somebody. I was actually at a meeting with a DTSE public participation people yesterday who said, what is this home rule advisory group? And
we know they're director of cleanup activities.
yeah, we have an Exide meeting next week, so maybe if Barbara's there, I'll ask if she would want to do that. I don't know what it takes to add another person or not, but
I think it's a good idea.
yeah, I might, if they're interested. I don't want to force someone to come to home rule and deal with the acronyms if they don't, they really are
Well, they can
doing it voluntarily.
Participate by phone too, but.
Yes, that's true, yeah.
Just have their input is valuable to, because we're talking about, is this gonna impact them or how's it gonna impact, and we don't know.
And that's what home rule is supposed to be about, trying to figure this interagency stuff out.
I think we're authorized 19.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Ann can figure it out for us.
I will say that the coordination with DTSC on this rule and continuing for these amendments has been very, very, very close.
Yeah, would probably help that Barbara Lee is the director too, former APCO, so.
Yeah, well, we co-chair the Exide Technology Advisory Group together. So we do see her every once in a while when she makes the meetings.
And one little announcement, just
Yes.
in case people didn't notice, September Ledge Committee
It's
and
here.
July Ledge Committee packets are now on the table.
If you don't have enough reading material.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mike. That was very helpful. And any questions or comments from members of the public on this one? No? Okay. And consensus building, I don't know if Jane ever joined us. Jane, did you join us?
I did.
Oh,
This
okay.
was after the introduction.
Yes. All right. Do you have anything on consensus building? Is this an item we need to continue to have on the agenda or not?
It's up to you. I don't have anything this time.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll drop it off unless we get active on it again. And I think what I would ask is if at least a couple weeks advance of the meeting, if you think you'd like to talk about consensus building and have it as an agenda item, just get in touch with Ann and maybe CC me and we'll put it on. Other than that,
Sounds good.
we haven't been actively engaging in it, so let's take it off the agenda. Okay, any questions or comments on this item that we have no presentation on? I assume not. Okay, subcommittee status reports, freight sustainability, we've touched on some freight issues, but Dan, do you have anything new
Well,
and
I don't know about
exciting for us?
new, I don't know about new, but I mean, there are, the cap is going on, right? And so,
Well, no, we can't talk about that acronym either. It's the Clean Air Action Plan, the third revision from our San Pedro Bay ports, the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach.
and I think the measures are highly focused on 2023 deadlines and stuff for at least heavy duty trucks and stuff.
No, the draft cap sets no goal for, well,
No emissions
2023.
goal, right? No emissions
Yes.
goal, right? But they're proposing to charge fees in 2023, right? For
Implement
trucks that
undefined
don't.
fee measure in 2023 for older trucks.
Right, so I guess there is concern on the no emissions goals and that there's a loss of near-term reductions that could be.
Yeah, zero emission goals for 2030 for off-road equipment and 2035 for heavy-duty drayage trucks.
Right, and I know that the gas company would love to see some near-term emissions reductions. We're using, these new low NOx truck engines and
South
RNG.
Coast
and
HMD would love to see attainment
Yeah.
deadlines met by 2023.
Maybe it's considered in the cap.
Yes, considered would be nice.
And then I know the ARB touched on their indirect source rule. I mean, they've initiated their, at least, effort to start looking at different types of indirect source measures. And I know the district's initiated the same thing for the AQMP. And I wasn't quite clear if when we do the AB 617 thing, if you're gonna do one with those things separately or if that was just gonna be pulled out and we're focused on the other AB 617.
I think we'll probably focus more on AB 617. It's kind of conceptual at this point, but CARB sees some tie-ins, but maybe we'll hear from them on that.
We might want to institutionalize our AB 617, not only do the presentation on it next time, but kind of just keep checking in on it. And I don't know, Kurt, maybe under the EJ item, because it kind of is an EJ issue. It's going to be targeting the most impacted communities. So if you're willing, maybe incorporate 617 updates. You won't have to do it next time because we're going to have a whole agenda item on it, but in the future, this is going to go on for a while and it's going to incorporate a lot of stuff. So I would think that would be
On the indirect source measure and the facility measures, here could be a separate item or something, because a lot of it will be under the goods movement, but that's another area, right, for the overlap, right? I mean, we don't know yet what either group's going to really come up with and stuff, so.
We're going to be at Mobile Source Committee in October for that, so.
617?
No, for the facility-based measures.
Oh. And the, I have to say CARB, California Air Resources Board has published a memo on how they plan on approaching this issue. It came out either Friday of last week or Monday of this week. You might want to look at it, give some clarity as to how they're going to deal with facility-based measures and indirect sources.
And then the last item I have is I understand that the 710 project's EIR the comment period was extended.
Was it?
That's what I understand, yes.
I heard that too, but I don't know the specifics.
Because they specifically refused to extend it at least once when asked.
That's all I have.
Is that a record for the longest running EIR process? Pretty close.
I don't know.
I have an example, it's very long, so I'm sure.
Longer
I've seen
than
it.
10 years? I don't know, how long has it been?
At least 10.
At least 10, more than that.
I know when I started here, it was already in process.
But this is now a supplemental EIR, EIS. If they have an expiration date of about 5 years based on case law, right?
Dicey legally after
Yeah,
a while.
they go rotten.
That's right.
Kurt, you have a question?
I just wanted to comment that, you were there at the Ports Committee meeting on August 31st.
Yes.
I thought it was a very interesting discussion and presentation, and it was obvious that where the concerns lie from the district versus what the ports had put out, and that is the district does not believe that there are enough emission reductions identified definitely soon enough for the district's needs by 2023? And can't they move some of those action items up a few years so that they'll take effect and get some emission reductions by 2023? And the other thing then is how, even if they do what they're proposing to do, how do we make that an enforceable commitment to get SIP credit for it? I thought the one bright spot where I think there was some agreement was it seemed to be generally agreed among the district and the port people that they were interested in getting the near zero technologies in soon rather than wait for totally zero technologies to come along later. And it's just a matter then of how soon is that possible and where's the money going to come from to do that. But you know, again, there is at least a framework out there now which can be worked on to see if it can be tightened up and made enforceable, or maybe there's some additional things to do. But I think at least you've got something to grab onto there and work with, which is perhaps more than you have with some of the other facility-based measures.
Yeah, we'll have to see. The developments on the funding side have been very encouraging. They still have to get approved this week, so that might make things a little better in terms of approach. Yeah, and we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
I mean,
obviously the ship emissions are all, that's the biggest part of the pie, and yet, that's relies on international conventions to get cleaner
yes and
engines in there, propulsion motors, and we need CARB to do the job on the harbor craft and the port and the cargo handling equipment. But again, there are technologies that are available for hoods or whatever for controlling the emissions while they're in the port. So I just see I'm somewhat optimistic that we can make some progress there.
Me too. Okay. Actually, unless there are any other questions on freight sustainability, we normally just wait till we get through. But the next one is item 9B, which is small business considerations. Bill, do you have anything for us this week?
Strangely, I do. Now that we put some of 1147 behind us. It'll be about 3 weeks, I guess, and it'll be about a year since the staff informed the governing board about the permit backlog, and they told you that they would have this backlog reduced over a 2-year period for, I think, $12 million or something like that. Anyway, however, and Lockheed has told us that I think they're about 39 or 40% complete so far, which has been good progress. You've done a great job. But after our last subcommittee meeting, we've been providing input into the process all this period of time. But anyway, I'm glad to report now that on the 27th, I've arranged with Lockheed to have the leadership of the Korean Dry Cleaners and Laundry Association and the California Cleaners Association to be in one of these rooms for a walkthrough demonstration like we had, because you all have decided to start with dry cleaners, and then you're going to move to either gas stations or auto body shops, depending on
For our online permit application.
Online permit application. So staff is making progress in that regard. I think I've told Lockheed that, I think especially the Korean dry cleaners, they're going to bring with them some unique challenges in this process, and so that I think there's going to be some hand-holding that's going to be required that won't be required from other business segments. But anyway, it's getting closer to reality, so that's my report.
Great. Thanks for bringing them in. I think good to deal with those bumps now than think that you have a finished product and not discover, and then discover later that you got a problem. Okay, Kurt, EJ,
I have nothing.
issues? Nothing? Okay. And climate change activities, David?
Have an update from beyond what we talked about before. We talked about the passage of the AB 398 and the companion bill 617. As far as cap and trade, it was interesting. I was looking at the auction proceeds from August 17th, where they sold all the credits at record high prices, and the proceeds to California from that one auction was $642 million. So quite a bit of money is coming in now that there's a stable cap and trade program that people can rely on. As we talked about earlier, there's quite a bit of wrangling in Sacramento to figure out who's going to get the bulk of the money. So it seems like that will be settled shortly, if I understand correctly, as far as where the money's going to be distributed.
It takes a majority vote.
So we'll see
And
by
a signature by the governor.
By the end of the week, we'll figure out where the money's going.
Well,
To some degree.
a lot of it's going to CARB, and then they will.
Then they will figure out.
They will figure out where the money's
That's,
going.
that's true too.
That's it.
Okay. Jackie, do you do the climate auction stuff? Any insights?
No, I think more than anything, now that we have certainty with the passage of AB 398, we saw this auction clear so much higher at a premium to the auction floor than any other auction. And so I really.
So what was the credit price?
It was cleared at $14.75 for the current vintage, and the auction floor price is $13.57. And we saw it not being successful or fully clearing all the volumes being sold because of the uncertainty with that lawsuit.
Yeah, the months before.
That was cleared. That came, and then now we have, we have a program through 2030, so people are comfortable, companies are comfortable buying, knowing that these credits don't expire, and hedging themselves for compliance in the future. But definitely interesting to see what's happened. It was truly successful for the state.
Do we expect prices to stabilize now, or do you think they're going to continue to?
It's interesting. I didn't anticipate that it was going to clear as high as it did. And so talking, a lot of times I take an advisory role when helping clients. And I think we saw it go up to almost $15.50 in the secondary market thereafter. Now it's come down to like $15.10.
But still,
But I
it
think
suggests that the next auction
Very
will be
strong,
high.
yeah. So I think we're likely to see it clear somewhere where it did this last time in August and November. And then, moving forward, we have a strong program, and we'll see, also one of the things that happened with the offset provisions in AB 398. So they also, they reduced the amount of offsets that you could use post 2020. And so we're looking at now a short market, it looks like, around 2024, 2025. So people are getting ahead of their compliance, knowing that there's going to be some major changes, and prices will continue to go up, regardless. So yeah, it's interesting. It's here to stay. It looks like for a while.
Here to stay till 2030.
You're in the right business.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, that takes care of subcommittee status reports. Any comments or questions on any of them? Anyone on the phone? Members of the public?
I have a question.
Sure.
How do we join subcommittees, or what is our process on being in the subcommittees? And
Once you're assigned to a subcommittee, you're locked in for life, I believe. That's been my experience. So I don't know. I
think over the years, some of the subcommittees met intermittently on their own when they had topics or something, but in more recent years, it's more of an assignment to provide updates to the
it's more of a
committee as
burden
whole.
than it is actually a privilege, I believe.
If someone has an issue you want to have explored, at least for myself, I welcome it. If someone has an issue that you want to meet on.
Assume climate, are you interested?
So many good ones.
Well, just volunteer for them all, they'll love you.
Well, and that's what I was more asking, is there sort of in charter, like,
It's
number?
very informal.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you have an interest in any of the subcommittee issues and upcoming before a meeting, would like to talk to any of the subcommittee chairs about the issue, you should feel free to do so. As long as we're not forming a quorum of the advisory group, we're okay.
I think Ann has all of our phone numbers and mail it.
Yes, yes, and you can work through Ann to get in touch with everyone.
Okay,
You need to. Okay, that's a really good question. We don't want to shake the chairs of our subcommittees because if they start abandoning their posts, then we might be stuck trying to figure out who would do it. Okay, report to and from Stationary Source Committee, Dr. Fine.
All right, no meeting in August, dark in August, however, what
It
that
went by
means.
really fast though, it's like, it wasn't even a break.
So we have to work double time.
Yeah,
on
how are we
Friday.
gonna do this in an hour and a half?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a huge agenda.
We tried to put them in order of priority, so if some lower on the agenda, if we don't get to, it's not an emergency. But I'll just go through. There is just an item for metals monitoring and analysis. It's coming from Matt Schott, Jason Lowe. Just get some more equipment to get the resources needed to continue our paramount compton hexachrome sampling. A very quick item on Home Rule Advisory Group membership.
Right, Bridget you're supposed to be joining us. You probably could have just sat up here. I think we have yet to have a proposed Home Rule Advisory Group member that was not unanimously approved on every occasion. So by next meeting, Bridget should be with us.
Right. So that's Bridget as the representative, and then Patty as the alternate. Then the meaty stuff, informational items, Rule 1168, which we didn't have a chance to do our usual kind of like 6-week advance to the committee, so this is actually scheduled for October. A lot of the issues have been worked out, maybe not every single issue, but so that's high. We've got to take that to committee before we can go to board in October. Then Rule 415, which is the rendering facilities. The board essentially instructed us to get that back on calendar for November, so we want to give the committee an update on where we are. We have essentially been ready to set hearing about 2 years ago, and we're just picking up where we left off. Again, an aggressive schedule. Rule 1420, also scheduled, I believe, for November. Rule 1180, that's 1420 is the smaller lead sources. 1180 is the petroleum refinery fence line and community air monitoring rule, also scheduled for November. Then these are more like reports, although some are more significant than others. We have Lockheed's going to give a brief update on the permit backlog. We committed to the board to do quarterly reports on where we are with the reclaim amendments. We will have a presentation, but if we don't get to it, at least people can see the material. We wanted to update the committee on 1148.3, which is our natural gas underground storage facility rule. And again, that's low because that could be delayed a month if we had to. And then there's also, we committed to a summer report back on TBAC and where OWEHA was. Again, whether we get to that, I don't know, but our 2 or 3 very brief slides will provide that update. So some of these may, if we don't get to it, will have to be delayed to the next meeting. Some, the presentation or the report provided might be sufficient to satisfy what we committed to do.
Kurt had his card up first, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to, and I don't know if maybe Patty or Bridget may want to talk about this as well, but some of us have been having some concerns about the pace of the pushing these rules through committee into the board.
There's an incentive clause in Phil's contract.
Yeah. That's been
by the rule.
Actually, we were suspicious.
The more rules adopted, the more he gets paid.
That it was in Wayne's contract, but I mean, before there are significant technical documents that have been even quasi-finalized for review and comment, and I mean, I think 1180 is sort of a poster child for that. With the rule basically requires fence line or community monitoring, but the guts of it is the technical guidance document that's still being worked on, and a draft was released in late August, and changes are being made, and yet it's going to the committee this Friday without what we think is a semblance of a final document. So
you'll be here on Friday to say that?
Yes.
Okay.
I expect others will be as well. So just there's a concern that that the we want to have a rules that are implementable and understandable and don't cause problem. And it's like when Bill was talking about the dry cleaners coming in and making sure that everything works with this online permit system. You know, if a rule is passed in haste and then becomes a problem implementing it, it's not good for anyone. If we, you know, if another month would allow us to work out these problems, I think that's time well taken. But I just wanted to go on record on that.
Just add one comment there. So part of coming to committee is not just the provisions of the rule, it's an update where we are, and it's also can be an update on scheduling the rule. We set the rule calendar at the beginning of the year, and then as you see, almost every month we have to delay some things, and we do that for a lot of things, but I guess staff doesn't want, sometimes we want feedback from committee to tell us that we need more time rather than just staff deciding. So that's part of coming to committee 6 weeks in advance.
Yeah. So hearing all that's great. Because my question was on 1180. It's scheduled for November. It seems to be on a pretty fast schedule, but like the socioeconomic report hasn't come out yet, and we're almost 2/3 through this month, and to where you'd be at the October board meeting where you'd set the hearing and stuff. So
that's true, but again, that's not unusual that the socioeconomic report comes out at the 30-day point. But for some rules, it's more important than others, and people want to see it before. I'm not sure this one fits the bill, but sometimes it'll be a brief part of the staff report. Sometimes it's a whole separate report. So.
Yeah, I have some concerns similar to Kurt's on this process, and one of them that still comes to mind, it's a gift that keeps on giving, is Rule 1147. That was
We voted on that already.
That was voted in July.
That was your apex of multiple years of work.
6 long years that I will never get back.
One simple vote. It was consensus, basically, right? I mean, there was no votes against it.
But no, actually there weren't. But at the adoption hearing, there was direction given by the board to the staff to do certain things, and now the staff seems to be off on these 10 rules, which I'm not questioning the importance or anything like that, but here's a rule that was adopted and it needs closure. Part of 1147 was an implementation guide, which originally was done by the gas company. I suggested that we use that so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel all over again. We were more or less promised we'd see that about a week after July 7th. Here it is, September. There was also concern by some members of the board over the cost of facilities that are under £1 a day, demonstrating that they are under £1 a day every 2 years, rather than spend $6,000 to $7,000 for a full-blown source test. We haven't heard anything about that on using portable analyzers, and not only using them, but getting them accepted. I mean, the readings from there. And time marches on. These spray booths get older every day, so I mean, some people are faced with that right now. The other was to review a list and publish it for manufacturers of low NOx burners that are acceptable to the rule, and then also to elicit competition or from these burner manufacturers to get certified or to get their guarantees in order. So I guess my question here, or my comment is, Kurt makes a very valid comment about, this process being rushed. I know you guys are working flat out, but still, you've got a responsibility to your customers, which is my folks and others.
So we are working on that, on all those fronts, and to be honest, that was an agenda item that we didn't want to make number 11 for Friday. So we looked at everything, and there were specific commitments to come back or needs on the rules on almost every single one of these, so that we put off to report back to stationary source now in November, which may also be very busy if we don't get to all of this. But we have been doing work on the 219 outreach, on the 1147 implementation guidance, on, we have money in a fund to help burner manufacturers get certified. We've already done that outreach. I realize we haven't like reported back yet or had working groups on it yet, but there has been activities.
And I think that lack of communication is a factor here, so.
So we're happy to update you or your members on where we are with that at any point. You know, Rita had some interest in some of that, so we can have that meeting.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Anyone on the phone? Here comes a member of the public to address the Home Rule Advisory Group. So thankful. Please.
Redressing the government for grievances, right? Isn't that
Yes,
what you always say?
you have a constitutional right to redress the government for grievances and 3 minutes to do so, so have at it.
We can do that. Rita Loof, Director of Environmental Affairs for Radtech International, and I just wanted to echo some of the comments that were made regarding the process. So speaking of Rule 219, and not to make it item number 12 on that agenda, but in May, staff assured the board that the record-keeping portions in Rule 219 were going to be minimal, and there was going to be a 1, 2, 3 form.
And we even had an example of
It was
what it's gonna
only a
look like?
thumbnail, and it said draft, and it was
Yes.
only a picture of the sample. It wasn't an actual document. And that's precisely my concern, because the rule actually reads, makes no reference to the low VOC material form, the LVM. And the rule doesn't mention the form. It says in a format approved by the executive officer. So I know Printing Industry Association and the Small Business Alliance were asking for more outreach to the printing community to tell them, hey, there's a new form now that you have to fill out. And at least we haven't seen anything. I mean, maybe it's going on internally. I did make a request, as I'm a member of the Local Government Small Business Committee, to have a presentation on that issue come back. And at the last meeting, we were told that it wasn't timely. So I'm not sure, you know, here we are in September, the rule was adopted in May, and we still don't really have certainty, and we have no guarantee that it's going to be on that form. There is no form available on the website or anywhere else. So I'm very concerned about that. The other concern I wanted to raise was something that Bill brought up at the public workshop for Rule 1168, and it's that because the meeting is going to be at the Biltmore, that causes a lot of confusion. People kind of assume it's going to be here, and if they don't look at the change of address, they get confused. Plus, it may make it inconvenient. So I know Bill had asked to maybe postpone it another month, but I know your calendars are pretty full. But it is a concern. I mean, I know I'm going to tell our folks.
Let's start first with trying to resolve the outstanding issues, and if we do that, then it's a consensus item, and we're not going to expect a whole lot of people to need to come and address the board. So let's start with that and keep our fingers crossed, hope we can resolve it, and then it won't be an issue, because I mean, everyone's concerned about getting them all done. We've got pressure pulling us both ways.
That rule has been very, I mean, that working group has been very well attended. I would say 30 some odd people.
Yeah.
I mean, we fill up CC2 easily.
There's a lot of affected manufacturers.
There are,
yeah.
But I think we've worked out, like I said, not all the issues, but a lot of the issues.
Yeah, you haven't worked out like 100% of mine, so.
What percentage?
For me, it's zero.
What percentage
Maybe you're
are you?
balancing out, taking an average of
Come
the
on,
working
it
group
can't be
members, but
zero.
for us has been pretty much zero, maybe 1%. I mean, some of the language has been tweaked a little bit, but it yields the same results. So it's
Okay, and the 219 form, it was a really simple form.
I'm going to look into it.
Yeah, you should just
The
approve,
engineer
go.
should be using it.
That's really basic information, really simple stuff. It shouldn't take, I mean, really. So, okay, thanks. All right, anyone else on 10? If not, other business? And if no other
business.
Yes, other business.
We do have other business.
One other
All right.
business.
Welcome and
Quick
thank you for
question.
coming.
Our last meeting we had on March 15th, we decided to do a community outreach portion of the agenda, and the last report that we had from community outreach was May 10th.
I can't remember that.
Yeah.
Your memory's much better.
It was
than
May,
mine.
well, I have to look it up. It was
Uh-huh.
well, I get emails from all sorts of people, environmentalists, i.e., community relations people, my council members, board members, they want to know what's going on with the SCAQMD as far as community outreach in the local communities. But our last agenda item was May 10th, and the report was given by Miss Lisa O'Malley. So I was wondering, when can we start that up again?
Sure, there's no reason why we can't talk about that. I don't know if there was a reason why it dropped off.
Well, a lot of things was going on, so.
Yeah. The public affairs office has been pretty busy.
Yeah.
And so there is some things to talk about and to report. And why don't we just make sure we put it on the agenda and for next time. And I'm sorry that we didn't have it on.
It's okay.
Okay. Great. Any other business? All right, public comment on anything not on the agenda? That brings us to lunch and adjournment. Please help yourself to, and you know, the people on the phone are missing out again on the steak and lobster.
Joe?
Yes.
Just one thing. It might help, Karen, if you were made aware of the local government small business advisory group. Derek chairs or co-chairs that, and so does.
So it's more public affairs oriented in the first place.
It really is.
I'm sure they have a vacancy.
I think isn't there a report in the board packet every month?
There is a board, yeah, there is a report, a board package on that, but there's also, public affairs, there's an outreach report in each board package. That it's a good place to start, because that tells you kind of the general things that part of the agency is up to.
Okay.
If you go to the board package, it's somewhere in the middle, usually. And can you have the small business assistance and local government advisory group, whoever's, I don't know who takes care of that.
Fabian or Derek?
It's managed by public affairs.
Okay. Can we have them get Tyrone the information and just about it, and so that he knows, and maybe just put him on the list for distribution with the agenda, so if there's things that he's interested. Yeah.
And I'm also the small business liaison for our neighborhood council, so that, there you go.
Yeah, so there might actually be a good fit.
Yeah,
If you'd like to be on another advisory group, they're always looking for good members, so.
Listen, with the pay that you guys give me.
Oh, yeah,
I
unbelievable.
love it.
I don't know if you get lunch at that one, I
They
can't
do.
remember.
You do.
You do, so there you go, there's another lunch involved too.
Absolutely.
More steak and lobster. So we will now call the meeting to adjournment and encourage everyone to eat the steak and lobster and tell the people on the phone, again, you've missed out on the good meal. If you show up in person, you will not be disappointed.
Lowry's next week.
Yes, and thank you so much for sticking with us the whole time. We're gonna hang up. Take care, bye.